Hello and welcome to Connected with Latham, where we discuss ideas, legal developments, and business trends shaping the global economy. This is the 8th episode of the Latham & Watkins Drug Pricing Series, and I'm Chris Schott, a partner in the healthcare and life sciences practice in our Washington, D.C. office. I focus my practice on all things market access, and that includes manufacturer compliance related to the Medicaid Drug Rebate Program, Medicare, and the 340B Drug Pricing Program, as well as, of course, implementation of the Inflation Reduction Act. And joining me is Danny Machado, an associate in our Washington, D.C. office.
Hi, Chris. Excited to be here.
And we have two guests on our podcast today, and we're very happy and excited that Lynn Buell and Sophie Sam from Riparian are able to join us today.
Thank you for having us, Chris. We're big fans of the podcast. Riparian is a division of two labs. We provide custom advisory, outsourcing, and technology solutions for government pricing, government contracting, government commercial payer claims adjudication, and gross to net reporting. This is Lynn. I'm a managing director. I've worked exclusively with federal and state programs in every industry subsegment on business matters, including methodology and reasonable assumptions, system evaluation and selection, master data management, business process design, compliance assessments, and multi-year internal compliance audit plan development. Sophie, would you like to introduce yourself?
Thanks, Danny and Chris, for inviting us to your podcast today. My name is Sophie Sam. I'm an associate director here at Riparian, and I lead our onboarding and integration team within our managed services group.
Well, thank you, and thanks so much for joining us today. In each episode, we focus on a specific drug pricing topic, and after discussing the substance, we ask the question, which Olympic sport is it like? And we have the list of Olympic sports here to see which most resembles our topic in terms of strategy, complexity, and also level of conflict. So Danny, what is our topic for today?
Today, we're going to be talking about price reporting, as we usually do, but today specifically about the periodic data submissions that pharmaceutical manufacturers make to the government under the various government programs. We're going to explore the actual reporting or the submissions themselves that take place through online portals, and they're different for each program. And what prompted us to talk about this today is the fact that for one of them, the Medicare Part B ASP reporting, this portal was recently updated by CMS.
Yeah, and beyond the ASP portal, maybe we just start talking about the various portals that are out there. Sophie, I'll have you take it from here.
Happy to clarify. There's a lot that's out there. Government pricing is already full of acronyms, so I'm just going to add a couple more to the alphabet soup when we start talking about the portals. First off, we have a couple of the federal programs. There is HPMS, which will continue to house information for, the manufacturer drug discount program, formerly Coverage Gap. And now it also includes drug price negotiation program. We then also have the ASP data collection module for ASP Part B reporting. Then there is CMS MDP for the Medicaid price types such as AMP and Best Price. That is used for the actual price reporting, but there are individual states with rebate portals that manufacturers also have to navigate and sign up for in order to receive their Medicaid invoices. Then there's also the HRSA OPACE portal that is used for certifying 340B pricing. What is interesting there is that's the only portal where manufacturers can access. It's not available to third parties. Then when we look at the VA side of the house, non-price reporting and contracting, it's all handled via paper contract. There's a portal there. However, there is one for retrieving TRICARE rebates and IFF sales reporting. In addition to the federal portals, there are some state portals. Specifically, Texas Vendor Drug Program has a new portal that is up and running. And this is used to complete an electronic certificate of information to have new drugs be considered for formulary addition in the state of Texas.
Yeah, thanks, Sophie, for this overview. And as we can tell, there's quite a bit going on here. And what's a little bit odd about this is how these systems are instrumental for manufacturer compliance. So as Danny said at the start, price reporting is this mechanism that we all have to comply with, and where the compliance actually happens is in these systems. It's the actual logging into a portal, uploading a data file or typing in data and hitting certify in those systems. And yet those actual portals are really pretty restricted. So Sophie mentioned that for 340B and OPACE, it's really the manufacturer only, And then for these other ones, it's limited individuals from the manufacturer. And then sometimes, consultants can have access, but the vast majority of users or stakeholders in the industry can't actually go in and see them. And not only does that apply to the systems themselves and the portal pages and those data entry sites, that even goes to user guides or data guides or announcements that are posted in these systems. So I'll bring in a corny analogy. I recently visited Kennedy Space Center, and you kind of go there and learn all about the space program, and thousands of people support all this on the ground, and then this very small select group of people gets to actually go into space. And that's kind of what this feels like over here. We all have to understand how this is supposed to work and give advice and try to counsel clients and make sure we have compliance, but then the actual where the rubber hits the road is sort of strangely obscured, and not many can actually see it. So we're fortunate to have Lynn and Sophie here today who actually log into these things and see it firsthand and who can give us some insight here. So Lynn, tell us a little bit more about these various portals and their requirements.
Yeah, so there are the various portals, and manufacturers face challenges with each. And I think Sophie's going to go into more detail on these.
Lynn and Chris, you're absolutely right. Being a listed user or registering with the portal certainly comes with certain responsibilities. Once you're registered, users also have to periodically log in to make sure that their accounts are active. I would say that the CMS HPMS system is probably the most challenging because it also requires an additional step that users have to complete an annual training. And if you don't complete it on time, then your account is subject to being deleted, and you have to go through the whole process of reapplying for a user ID. I think another challenge that we see manufacturers face is around coordination of timing of transitions when someone's leaving or joins the company. We usually recommend manufacturers keep some kind of offline tracker with those roles current, just to make sure that that transition is seamless when you're having new folks join your team. The other thing that manufacturers have to keep in mind is the timing of updates. When you're making those changes, you have to consider the impact to certification timelines that are on a monthly, quarterly basis, as well as impacting the Medicaid invoicing cycle and when those rebates drop, just to make sure that it's going to the right hands.
So Sophie, I know we work with a lot of emerging manufacturers. What are some of the challenges that we're seeing them face?
One thing that's come up more frequently with some of the emerging manufacturers that are new to the program is, we're seeing manufacturers with foreign parent entities. And they're trying to navigate how to do setup in the portals because a lot of the portals have US-based requirements. So you're having to make sure that you have a US-based address, a social security number in hand for the user, so that there is a lot of internal coordination to make sure that you have all the right information and you meet those requirements.
Those are very interesting points, Sophie. And I'm thinking here that a good example of this overlap between the technical requirements that you're speaking about and the legal standards, which Chris and I consistently look at, maybe would be the certification requirement. Let's remember that the certification requirement is different for each program. And just to give one example, for the MDP or Medicaid system, the certifier can be the CEO, the CFO, someone with equivalent authority, or anyone with that delegated authority. Whereas if you move over to Medicare Part B in the ASP certification, that delegation has to be to an individual who actually reports directly to either the CEO or the CFO. So what seems like a small nuance could actually change a lot in terms of who can certify that data that's being reported.
Yeah, and maybe another compliance angle here is just the monitoring of communications. So we have seen it frequently in the MDP system, the Medicaid programs reporting system, that CMS will send out informational emails to the so-called technical contacts. And that's a pretty big mailing list because every manufacturer has to have a technical contact. But those emails generally don't go out to the public. They don't go out to outside counsel or other folks like that. So inside the company, it really makes sense to ensure that the mailbox of the technical contact, that's what it's called for the Medicaid system, has other names for the other systems, that those mailboxes are being monitored so that if the individual who's signed up there goes on vacation for a week, you don't get important inquiries or information from the government that kind of lingers in the mailbox. As we noted, the reason why we're talking about this subject today of these portals is, of course, prompted by the new ASP reporting portal for Medicare Part B as in boy. So we would be particularly interested to hear from Lynn and Sophie, what are some of these changes in the ASP reporting that are being made as part of this new portal? Sophie, do you want to start us off on that?
Yeah, absolutely, Chris. So the new ASP portal goes effective for Q1 2024 reporting that is due in April. I'm very excited about it. The portal is getting a facelift. It's going to have a much more modern look and feel, similar to CMS's MDP program. Some of the highlights that we're expected to see is the way that you can search and set up new product information. I think one thing that's going to be particularly helpful around this is the guidance in setting up alternate IDs, which is definitely going to be helpful for the skin substitute products that are tracked using only alternate IDs and not NDC. Another thing that users can expect is their user IDs and the submitter product data will carry over from the old systems, that they don't have to worry about, having to re-enter that information. Some new things, though, to think about: there are going to be 4 new fields that manufacturers will need to be ready to populate in order to make that first quarterly submission. They're mainly around product, so expansion around, unit for volume per item, package type, unit for strength, and then first marketing date. So the manufacturers will need to make sure that they're coordinated and get this information ready in order to have product data certified in order to certify pricing for this first quarter. There's also a new layout for the assumptions page. CMS did clarify during a training Q&A that reasonable assumptions should be provided with each submission, even in the event that there are no changes to your reasonable assumptions. And the most exciting change of all is the ability to formally restate ASP in the new portal.
Yeah, so I think it's very significant that CMS is giving us pretty material industry guidance here in connection with this new reporting portal. So for example, this notion that reasonable assumptions are supposed to be submitted every time. I mean, that's been known in the program, going back to a preamble comment in a Federal Register notice physician fee schedule back in 2006, right? It's been a long time, but again, here through this portal and then information about the portal, CMS is giving us this important information that the government actually is expecting these reasonable assumptions to be included in the submission. So this would be a good prompt for manufacturers to go back and review those reasonable assumptions that they have been submitting, and if they haven't been submitting, to consider beginning doing that now, potentially. The restatement piece, also very interesting. As we know, this is very different from the Medicaid world, where the Medicaid regulation expressly addresses restatements, and there's a 3-year window. If you want to go outside the window, there's other things you have to do. In Part B, that's not part of the regulation. So if you look at the Part B statute or the Part B regulation, nothing addresses restatements. And yet we've known implicitly that CMS wants us to restate because the old system already kind of allowed us to do it. And it seems like here it's being provided as a functionality in a more even formalized fashion. So another important point for manufacturers to consider when they review their compliance: if there is a need for a restatement, oftentimes the restatement can hit multiple price types. And if ASP is somehow impacted in historic periods, definitely makes sense to carefully consider whether it makes sense to restate for prior periods. We focus on a lot of the federal portals, and of course, ASP is federal. What about states, Danny? What about Texas?
Right, Chris, you're exactly right. We should not forget about the states, especially, like you say, Texas. And thankfully, the quite detailed Texas-specific price reporting requirements from about 10 years ago were rolled back. But Sophie, as you mentioned, now Texas is establishing an online portal for new drugs. And I wonder, Lynn, if you have any insight into that.
Yeah, so the Texas portal is going to go live on March 30th. And while we're aware of some of the changes that are going to be in effect, there are also some open questions that we have related to the portal, which I think, Sophie, you can talk to.
Thanks, Lynn. We're really expecting to see a more user-friendly UI in the new Texas portal. Similar to the ASP portal, we're going to see a migration of user IDs as well as any open new product applications that will carry forward. So it's not like you have to restart the entire submission process. We're also expecting to see a lot more validations and verifications added to the system, around the number of users being assigned to a labeler code. So there's like a manage access for being able to request access, but there's also like a read-only capability for manufacturers or other users. There's also more cross-checking to make sure that different users aren't submitting new product data. There's also a check to make sure that the product isn't on the formulary before you continue on into the next step. And most of the requirements are largely the same. You're still required to submit a number of documentation, such as like the FDA approval letter, package inserts, and things like that. And the only pricing requirement that is still required at the time of submission is the price to wholesaler or distributor.
And I think, Lynn, we heard that there are going to be FAQs issued soon in Texas, right? So what are some topics that we're hoping those FAQs will cover?
I think we're looking for some more guidance around the timing of when the submissions are required. So should manufacturers wait until they certify the product and pricing data in MDP? Or should manufacturers submit immediately and wait for Texas to change the review status? And we are also waiting to hear if third parties can have access to the portal.
Yeah, another area where these portals get interesting is when the government really uses them to directly regulate the industry and our submissions. So I'll give one example, which I understand to be the case in the MDP system for Medicaid. So if you enter a new drug in there, you go to the Add New NDC9 screen, and then you fill a bunch of product information into that screen. And one is FDA approval type, and you can select new drug application, NDA approval. So if you select that as the drug approval, and then you go to the next field, which is drug category, which, as you know, Medicaid sort of categorizes drugs in 3 buckets, 2 of which are innovator or brand, and then the third one is generic or non-innovator, multiple source, end drug. So if you've selected NDA approval, you cannot select end drug as your drug category. And in a way, this really runs counter to the entire price reporting paradigm that we have, right? We are obligated to report our data, our product data, our pricing data to the government, but that's our responsibility as manufacturers. And so if we do it wrong or in a non-compliant fashion, yes, then there are penalties. But by setting up the system in a certain way, CMS is really forcing our hand in that we have to report things a certain way that this portal will allow us to do. So essentially, CMS is really using software coding in some basement back room here when they code this web interface and they code these pages to really mandate certain responses. And this type of approach where the government is implicitly forcing us to report in a certain way is, of course, also significant for Inflation Reduction Act related topics, such as the negotiation piece and other parts of that. So, Sophie, how is the related HPMS portal being implemented?
Chris, that is a great question. That is also what we're wondering at the moment as well. Back in May of 2023, CMS did issue a memo stating that the manufacturer discount program is going to stay in HPMS, and the drug price negotiation program would also be housed there, like the data elements that would be collected for reporting. However, there really hasn't been details around how Part B and Part D inflation rebates will be invoiced, or the payment remittance. We know that coordination for like the discardage or rebates for Part B and their preliminary reports were handled via email, and that was solicited based off of contact information from the ASP portal. So we might see kind of an overlap between the uses of CMS HPMS and the new ASP portal to manage some of the new programs that are coming out. So we're really hoping to expect CMS to issue new guidance, operational guidance later this year.
And Chris, I know you mentioned regulation through the portals. This may even be more of an issue with the IRA, where the statute allows CMS to implement some of the statute's legal requirements through guidance. This raises the question on whether a user guide relating to a reporting portal, which is a document that may not be generally accessible, kind of like the portal itself, is this guidance that could then impact the legal rights and the obligations of a pharmaceutical manufacturer.
Definitely a lot to think about, ranging from operational considerations like getting the correct users set up in the portals to these legal and compliance overlays that potentially require deeper analysis. So I think that takes us to the question we had posed at the very beginning: which Olympic sport is it like? So maybe we go around and see what our thoughts on that are. Lynn, do you want to start us off?
Yeah, so I'm going with the decathlon, which is a sport consisting of 10 separate track and field events. So these events are held over 2 days, and the winners are determined by the combined performance in all. So I think this is similar to the various portals that all have different requirements and formats, but really must all be completed in order to meet program requirements.
Excellent choice. Sophie, what do you think?
I also headed towards track and field. I'm thinking the 4x4 relay race. So a lot of handoffs to make it successful. So maybe it's not a super long race, but they are pretty fast, and they need to be done correctly in order to be successful.
Yeah, I really like that because you're touching on the multidisciplinary nature here of this, right? Of handing this off, because you'll deal with people at the company that have to upload data, prepare data. You're dealing with the certifier. They can all have to work together to make the compliance happen. Danny, what have you selected?
I went a little bit different, but I thought of archery because archery is a sport where contestants need to, shoot their arrows as close to the center of the target as possible, right? And this is how price reporting is. For instance, the monthly AMP is computed to 7 decimal places, rounded to 6 decimal places for reporting. Precision is key, and there's very little room for mistakes.
Yeah, very interesting. I went also with an individual sport, namely figure skating. And what caught me here is in the description where it says, ice skating has developed from a practical way to get around on ice into the elegant mix of art and sport it is today. And it's almost kind of like that's what we've seen with the portal. It's supposed to be a way for you to upload the data, but we're being forced to really contort ourselves into all sorts of artful figures to fit in with the requirements that the government's imposing on us through those websites and software coding. So with all this talk about data portals and now Olympic sports, I am definitely ready for the after party or a nice dinner. Danny, where are we going?
Oh, my favorite part, of course. I think we should go to Amazonia. It's a delicious Peruvian restaurant in Blagden Alley, not too far from us here in the office. But what caught me is that they have a nice rooftop, and with the weather getting nicer, I think that's our spot.
That sounds great. Can't wait to go. Thanks to Lynn and Sophie for joining us from Riparian, and thanks to Danny for being a moderator.
Thanks for having us. We're excited for future podcasts.
Thanks for having us, Chris and Danny. We hope we get to see you in DC.
And thank you to our listeners for checking out the Latham & Watkins Drug Pricing Series, which is part of our Connected with Latham podcast. You can subscribe and listen to new and archived episodes of Latham's podcasts on lw.com, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or anywhere else you listen to podcasts. If you have questions or would like additional information, please email us using the links located in the show description. We hope you'll join us again next time.
This podcast is provided as a service of Latham & Watkins LLP. Listening to this podcast does not create an attorney-client relationship between you and Latham & Watkins LLP, and you should not send confidential information to Latham & Watkins LLP. While we make every effort to assure that the content of this podcast is accurate, comprehensive, and current, we do not warrant or guarantee any of those things. And you may not rely on this podcast as a substitute for legal research and/or consulting a qualified attorney. Listening to this podcast is not a substitute for engaging a lawyer to advise you on your individual needs. Should you require legal advice on the issues covered in this podcast, please consult a qualified attorney. Under New York's Code of Professional Responsibility, portions of this communication contain attorney advertising. Prior results do not guarantee a similar outcome. Results depend upon a variety of factors unique to each representation. Please direct all inquiries regarding the conduct of Latham & Watkins attorneys under the New York's disciplinary rules to Latham & Watkins LLP, 1271 Avenue of the Americas, New York, New York, 10020. Phone number 1-212-906-1200.